the AI and Data Show for the latest updates in AI, with host Matthew Holman and special guest Richard Susskind.
I'm here with Richard Susskind, author of How to Think About AI. Richard, welcome to the show.
Good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So we start every interview in the same way, which is we insist on asking our guests some icebreaker questions. Is it okay if I ask you some icebreaker questions?
I did think they were coming at the end on out of one mark, but please do.
Do you prefer Star Trek or Star Wars or neither?
Star Trek.
Excellent.
Quite clearly.
Do you sing in the shower? And if so, what do you sing?
Oh, yes. Well, no, I sing all the time, actually, not just in the shower. It's apparently an annoying habit. Anything that's on my mind, the earwig of the day, often James Taylor.
Excellent. If you weren't a specialist tech AI lawyer, what would your ideal job be?
Probably a novelist.
A novelist?
Yeah.
Okay. What is the best holiday destination you've been to?
That's difficult. A toss-up between Mauritius on the one hand and very different, the Scottish island of Harris on the other.
Wow, two very strong choices there. If you were a superhero, what would your ideal superpower be?
I've always quite liked to fly. That would be good.
Indeed.
Let's say not in a plane.
If you were making lunch for yourself at home, what would you make?
A sandwich of some sort.
Well, thank you for indulging me with the irritating icebreaker questions.
I'm not sure that helps. Must be the substance of AI. But...
Well, it definitely helps the audience get to know you a bit better. And let's start with your book. You, just out of interest, how long did it take you to write it? And how long were you percolating the thoughts and ideas that...
Well, there are two different questions there. As you know, I worked on AI in the early 80s, and that's what I wrote my doctorate on. AI in law, 83 to 86. So in one way, I've been thinking about it for over 40 years. I wrote it in less than a year, though. There wasn't huge amounts of research to do because all I do is read and think about AI. And so it came rather quickly. And how I write books as a generality is I tend to be giving a lot of talks, and that helps me organize and structure my thinking. And I take a lot of notes. And then at some stage, I just feel I'm ready to pull this together into some kind of book. I do an outline, say, here's 8 chapters or however many it would be. In this case, it grew a little. But I have a fairly strong sense of the structure at the outset. And then it's not filling in the gaps, but that allows me then to write quite quickly.
Let's get into the meat of our debate.
Sure.
First topic is about the ever-evolving nature of AI. You say in chapter 2 of the book, many newcomers to the field of AI seem to believe that recent inventions, ChatGPT and the rest, are the end game, whereas they actually are faltering first steps. And then there's this phrase later on that I've heard other people quote about the book. They say that you say, as a generality, today's systems are the worst they're ever going to be, which is both a wonderful and terrifying idea.
It's slightly glib, actually, because there are some systems that will fail and won't do any more. But there's a general point there that they're all moving ahead at a remarkable rate.
Well, there's a very deep truth there, and I think it's one that instantly chimes with people. I think most of them recognise the truth of it. You also spend a lot of time, particularly in the second half of the book, talking about what if AGI thinking, this idea just continues to drop into the chapters. Why is it, do you think, that people today are suffering from tech myopia? And are you asking too much of people to do what if AGI thinking? Do you think that's something the general populace can actually do?
A couple of explanations necessary there. I think AGI stands for Artificial General Intelligence, which is the idea that systems can perform almost all the cognitive tasks that human beings can undertake. So in the broadest of terms, they're as clever as us. This people find deeply unlikely and deeply unsettling. But if you look at the trajectories, if you look at the origins of AI in the early 1950s, when you can trace the original concept, breakthroughs happened in the next few decades every 5 to 10 years. They're now happening every 6 to 12 months. We also have to get into our heads the idea of the not yet invented systems. It would be entirely improbable to think there'll be no further breakthroughs. And so what I try in the book is to alert people to the idea given the scale of investment in AI, given the brightness of the people involved, given the evident market demand, given crucially the use of AI in the development of the next generation of AI, I think we are going to see and continue to see an explosive growth in the capabilities of these systems. And that's why I say that although we should rejoice in and be amazed by what we have in the form of generative AI, it's simply the latest chapter in an ongoing story. It's not the first chapter, and it's assuredly not the final chapter. So what I want to do in the book is not discuss today's technologies, the ethics of today's technology, the regulation, the impact, and so forth. I want to take the readers on a journey into the future. And my point, the focal point in many ways, is this idea of AGI. And even if we don't get there, it's useful to think about it, to stretch our thinking, especially about what we do and do not want. Now, the idea of technological myopia is that people evaluate the future of potential of technology in terms of today's limitations. So you'll see, particularly in LinkedIn almost every day, here's another report done by social scientists or academics or critics saying, here are the various shortcomings. And all of them are valuable and interesting, but to think that somehow these will be shortcomings forever seems to me, again, to be improbable. And so the myopia is somehow to get stuck on or to believe that what we have as shortcomings today are permanent roadblocks. Are people ready to think of AGI? Well, that's the purpose of the book. I'm saying if we do have AGI or near AGI, it's possibly the most significant development in the history of humanity. And so I would like to begin a public conversation about it. The public conversation just now is the ethics, the regulations, the limitations, the applications of ChatGPT and the rest. All terribly important, but not nearly as important as what these systems are likely to end up as. And I want to open people's eyes and encourage parents to think, what does this mean for their children? Encourage business leaders to think, what does this mean for our long-term strategy and the sustainability of what we do? Encourage policymakers to ask, what does this mean for our country and our competitive positioning and for the way we govern?
Do you think, as an aside, that all of these reports, and I agree, they're coming out all the time, do you think they're coming out partly to satisfy an insatiable need within us to feel better about an uncertain future?
They certainly resonate. And I think the authors know that people take great comfort from clear expressions and evidence of the limitations of these systems. But to some extent, a lot of the narrative that goes alongside it, I think, is disingenuous. When I'm advising business leaders and government leaders, I wouldn't say, well, don't worry, AI is not going to develop any further. And there was a study that looked at ChatGPT in early 2023, which should condition our thinking about the 30s. I think that's bizarre. I think it's, of course, important to understand the limitations of today's systems in terms of their reliability. But as I say, to frame our future vision of what this technology might achieve in terms of limitations of 18 months ago seems to me to be short-sighted at best and misleading, in fact.
Your life's work has been writing books that have a number of very clear themes, almost orthodoxy, where you're particularly challenging the concept of work, the way work is done, especially in the professions. The book Future Professions talks very strongly to that, as does Tomorrow's Lawyers. This book also talks to that theme, but it's clearly a part of a piece of many parts as well. It's not exclusively the theme. Focusing on that issue, though, because it's the one that a lot of people want to talk about. It seems to be getting a lot of traction on the media, on LinkedIn, and everywhere else. Do you think that it's very forgivable that professionals still seem to think that their jobs are perfectly safe? Do you think there's going to be a recalibration between the challenge to white-collar jobs and the perceived safety of blue-collar jobs? I mean, that's a very clumsy way of expressing the idea, but hopefully you capture it. And is your job under threat?
Yeah. My job's certainly under threat. And I say it in the book. I give an example of my use, quite early use of ChatGPT, and slightly later use as well, asking it to draft a column for me for the Times or out for the Times and saying, by the time we get to GPT-6, I won't be needed anymore. And I don't just say that for a laugh. I say that to bare my soul and to encourage people to think that if we have technologies that can deliver the outcomes that our clients, our people, our organizations want in ways that are cheaper, quicker, more convenient, and higher quality, the market is not going to show any loyalty to our traditional ways of working. Now, in the book, I talk a lot about not us thinking, that I find that every time you speak to a professional, they will identify all sorts of reasons why their work will not be subject to or affected deeply by AI, but that all other professions clearly are up for grabs. And this, it seems to me, to be an unrealistic point of view. I think for very good reason. So often as professionals, we've spent so many years of our lives working in a particular way. We usually, I believe, think that the way we work is important, often morally significant, and that there cannot be better ways of doing what we do. It's been perfected, and we're committed to it. But I think this is to some extent a romantic view of our work, and the challenge I put down is to ask, when is it that how you work, for example, is intrinsically important? That's to say, it's important in and of itself how you work. Or is it just instrumentally important? That's to say, it's important because of the outcomes you deliver. So I say of doctors, for example, that people don't really want doctors, they want health. And if we can find other ways of delivering health that don't involve doctors, don't expect loyalty to doctors. And similarly, I would challenge lawyers and say to you that there may be other ways of delivering the commercial or business or personal outcomes that people seek when they are after some kind of legal advice. Now, in none of this do I take any pleasure in suggesting that as machines become increasingly capable, there'll be less for humans to do, but that's what follows. And just to clarify one point, that there are two ways of looking at this question, because people often say of the work in the professions, oh, it's tremendously pessimistic. And we see actually, and expressly in the book, we take an optimistic view. It depends what perspective you have. If you look at it from the point of view of the provider, then yes, indeed, some of this seems rather threatening. But if you look at it from the point of view of the recipient, the patient, the client, the student, what we will see through AI are a far richer, more affordable, and more accessible set of solutions and services than the current model. So our optimism in the book about the professions was saying, here's a way of making valuable, often scarce human expertise and knowledge more widely available and more easily accessible. Our book really wasn't focused as much on the professional providers as on the problems they solve and what it might mean if we have AI for those who receive their services. Tomorrow's Lawyers, my book, it's within 3 editions of that, is far more provider-oriented. It's saying, if you're in law, what does this mean for you? And what it does mean for you, I argue, is that you're going to, over time, need to reskill and retrain. Now, in the latest book on AI more generally, I touch quite a lot on the future of work. But I raise the issue, I think, in starker terms, because going back to your earlier challenge about what if AGI, what would it be like in terms of our labor force if we had systems that could do all the work we as humans could do? I think the implications are profound, but it's very hard to find a business leader or a government leader who's prepared to discuss this. So the reason I say we must be asking what if AGI is because we face in the 30s potentially the gravest and most significant challenge to our conception of the human labor force and our perception of market and economics than perhaps we've ever faced. So I think it's worth discussing.
Profound because work may be a thing of the past. The concept of work may be a thing of the past. Profound because taxation and economies based on work may no longer be sustainable. Is it those things? Is it more than those things?
I think that the way we think about our lives is very much rooted in humans working for a living. Many people will say, in fact, that work gives their life meaning too. And our conceptions of productivity within the market are very much rooted in a labor force undertaking work. But if we no longer have a labor force, if great productivity is achieved through these remarkable systems, then this challenges many of our assumptions, and one begins to wonder, how will you earn a living? Another question that arises, therefore, is how might we share the remarkable wealth that these systems create amongst those who are disempowered, disenfranchised, as they might see it, because they no longer have employment or well-paid employment.
I have to ask you, forgive me for this tangent, but you've been challenged by many for being pessimistic, a point you made earlier. With the advent of ChatGPT and its the sort of tidal wave of systems into particularly the legal profession, but others as well, did you at least feel a bit like, I told you so, guys?
There's a little bit of that. I wouldn't admit it if I was absolutely delighted, but I'm not really, because I mean, you say I've been challenged, and it is true, but I've also been supported over the years by numerous academics, by numerous practitioners, by government people and judges and the rest of it. So I've not felt beleaguered. And in fact, if I'm honest, I quite enjoyed the challenge. I think this has been a good thing to devote my life to asking people to think differently about how they live, how they work, how they help others, and how technology might affect that. There is a strong sense in which, and it is quite funny, that people now seem to forget that not many years ago they were deeply skeptical, because without question, the topic of AI has shot up the agenda of business leaders and government leaders. And it's there staring them in the face almost every meeting in a way it simply wasn't, say, 3 or 4 years ago. So a little bit of happiness about it, but not too much.
Well, I think you'd be very entitled to, if you wanted to, feel happy and smug about it. Let's move on to a different topic, and it's one that is certainly vexing legal professionals, particularly legal professionals in my field and other externals and in-house lawyers who are watching, and that is the issue of AI and creativity, particularly in the regulated and IP sector. We have this government consultation from last year. We had all of the noise from the creative sectors. We're waiting for the government to tell us what it thinks it's going to do. We've got the DUA bill going through its parliamentary process with the House of Lords changes being rejected. So all of this is happening. In chapter 5, you summarise this issue quite nicely. You talk about the complexity of the creative industries, and I suppose to some extent it ties into what we were just talking about in work. Do you think that, well, let me ask that again, sorry. What is it about the nature of art and creativity that so vexes this issue? And do you have any thoughts about the government's proposals from its consultation last year to create this European-like system for LLM training?
Originally, by which I mean a few years ago, when we were discussing the impact of AI on work and the professions, and people said to us, what kind of work should our children do? We tended to say, why not something creative? Because when we looked at the systems in 2014, 15, it did seem at that stage that what we would call creativity, the generation of innovative, novel content, seemed beyond the capabilities of most machines. And yet we saw with the emergence, for example, of AlphaGo, that game where the system played a remarkable move that most people, if it had been a human being, would have said it was genius, not just innovative or creative. And certainly since generative AI, we all know that these systems can produce text, images, music that is certainly novel. And to some extent, I think this does challenge our perception of ourselves. I think for many people, the defining human capability had been our creativity, and the mechanistic nature, or the perceived mechanistic nature of machines seem to be over in the edge, while center screen is humans being innovative, imaginative, creative, and so forth. So there's perhaps a challenge to what it is to be human, and one of our central characteristics. Well, what I try to explain in the book is that these systems, they're not creative in the same sense as we are. We use our own intellect and minds and brains in ways that we don't fully understand to create innovative content. But machines do it in entirely different ways. I think it would be folly to suggest because they work differently that what they produce isn't innovative and new. Well, what fascinates me is looking many years ahead. And again, I urge people to engage in what if AGI thinking. My worry about the current debate, and of course the creative industries have been a very clear and loud voice in this debate, is that it is quite short-sighted and it is quite reactive. And we haven't fully thought through the paths that we're likely to follow in the world of creation and innovation. So if you think of what if AGI, if that's your starting point, what if human beings could be outperformed by these machines? This could mean that we have literature that is superior to what we read today. It could mean music that is actually created, personalized for us on the basis of all the other music we like. It'll be immersive, participative, virtual reality-based entertainment. The whole nature of culture and entertainment is likely to change. And so what I worry about is that the debate is about what I call short-term AI. What will the short-term impact be on people in the creative industries of fundamental changes in intellectual property law? And I think, again, that's very producer-provider oriented. And what we're seeing, I think, a lot from the creative industries is, to some extent, the not us thinking. And they might not be saying it can't be done to us, but they're saying it ought not to be done to us. And I would ask, and I think this is why I'm broadly sympathetic to the more liberal approach that the government's recommending, I would ask the creative industries to think less of themselves in the same way as I say to doctors and lawyers, it's not about you, and to think we are perhaps on the threshold of transforming what it is to be entertained. We are on the threshold of perhaps having within the United Kingdom an AI-based entertainment industry that could be world-beating because we've identified quicker than others how to adapt to these emerging technologies. And this is what I want a public discussion about. The rush to regulate makes me feel queasy because, and I know this of parliamentarians, the harsh reality is that very few people in Parliament have any real conception of AGI and what is going to unfold. And secondly, the discussions are so terribly focused on the immediate needs and concerns that arise from AI. We need this broader public conversation. When we had concerns about in vitro fertilization, about genetic engineering, we took the step back and we had serious commissions of inquiry and public discussions. In AI, because people have these very strong instinctive views, somehow these visceral responses seem to morph into policymaking without really informed, impressive, deep, profound, imaginative debate. And so while my instincts and intuitions are to join with the government in being more open-minded and being more liberal and thinking again about copyright and how it governs the systems that require to be trained, I, at the same time, still feel that we're not really having a sophisticated conversation about the 30s. And that concerns me. It concerns me not just in the creative industries. It concerns me in government. If you can look at the NHS, lots of messages about using AI in the NHS. Most of this is short term. People are saying nurses and doctors should and hospitals should use AI. But 2035, if we've AGI, if you think of, for example, primary healthcare, that won't necessarily, or shouldn't be, in my view, GPs using AI. It'll be AI systems that are the first port of call for all of us because they will be able to outperform not just individual practitioners, but whole teams of physicians. So we're moving into a different world. And somehow, and this again, I say to you, is the importance of the what if AGI thinking for ourselves as individuals, for our children, for our community, for our economy. We've got to look above what is essentially short-term AI, characterized, I should say, about what I call automation, or what economists call task substitution. So this view of AI is, what do humans do? What tasks are there? Where can we pull out a human and plug in a machine? And so many of the studies on the economic impact of AI are based on that model. But something far more profound is going on. And the example I give in my book in surgery is that robotic surgery is task substitution, it's automation. Here's what surgeons do. Here's where it might be better for a machine to be involved. But the future of healthcare, in my view, is not robotic surgery. It's AI-enabled non-invasive therapy, and it's preventative medicine enabled by AI. So let's go back to this idea of outcomes again. People don't want surgery. They want their problem overcome. And if non-invasive therapy can give them that, and that will be enabled through AI, then that will radically change the nature of healthcare, as will, and this is something Tony Blair's been saying a lot, preventative medicine. So we've got AI-based preventative medicine. Much of the need we have for conventional medicine in all its various sorts will actually be eliminated because people will be able to look after their own health and will be able to identify problems long before they arise. And so what I encourage people in law, for example, is to stop thinking that this is about automating the legal work we already do today. Think from the point of view of the client in terms of the equivalent of non-invasive therapies. That's what I want you to think about with your clients. How can I give them the answer, the outcome they want, but in a way that's less invasive, that's cheaper, quicker, more convenient? Or better still, how can I help them put that fence at the top of the cliff rather than the ambulance at the bottom?
Can I challenge you on something there?
Please do.
I think a lot of businesses, a lot of governments, a lot of what we know is common in lawmaking in Western societies are by nature reactive. Reactivity is what they do. A problem arises, they react to the problem. A problem arises, they react to the problem. And what you're suggesting with what if AGI thinking is they become proactive. Now they think about a thing that doesn't yet exist. Are we really just asking them to do something which is fundamentally beyond them? It is almost ultra vires in a sense that they cannot possibly get there because they lack the capacity to even understand what it is you're asking of them.
We haven't had the tools in the past, but many in-house lawyers say to me, I do a lot of research with in-house lawyers, that their aim is to become involved earlier in the life cycle of issues within their business. Very often the lawyer is called in when the problem is staring the non-lawyer in the face, or the lawyer is called in to do what is rather disparagingly called the wordsmithing, where you put your head in your hands. If you'd asked me, I wouldn't have structured it or organized like this in the first place. So there's very straightforward issues, I think, about how we might, and this is independent of AI, how we might encourage lawyers to become earlier in the life cycle, involved earlier in the life cycle. But we haven't had the tools to do the kind of risk management I'm talking about. I did a project recently with some in-house lawyers, and we're trying to pin down the essence of in-house lawyering, working at board level as well in this. And I know this to some extent sounds simplistic, but in the end, the pithy way of summarizing what is expected of the lawyers is to keep us out of trouble. That's what many people on boards want. It's the chief executive, keep us out of trouble, whereas some people rather amusingly say keep us out of jail. And by its very nature, and this is something I wrote about back in 96 in my book, The Future of Law, you're absolutely right. The nature of professional service has been reactive, but I'm saying no more, because we can easily envisage, and there are already some early examples of this, that you will be able to insert into the systems of organizations, the financial systems, their databases, their email, their word processing systems, bots and agents that will roam around. And just as when your blood is taken, doctors are looking for early markers of disease, these systems will be looking for early markers of legal difficulties, perhaps exposure to litigation there, danger of defamation over there, possible cartel activity over there, breach of contract there. We will have the ability to monitor and evaluate a business's exposure to legal liability. And what really amuses me, and this is partly technological and just partly an issue of working practice, is we've developed some really good systems for two sets of circumstances. When a dispute arises, for reviewing huge quantities of documents and identifying those that are likely to be relevant. Similarly, in due diligence, reviewing huge quantities of documents, identifying clauses or contracts that could be problematic. Isn't it interesting that we wait for an event to use these systems? We wait for a dealer, we wait for a dispute. And in a rather prosaic way, all I'm saying is, why are we them running all the time? So my hope and ambition, and to some extent the holy grail for many in-house lawyers, or better, for many client organizations, is to use AI precisely, as I say, to put that fence at the top of the cliff. You're completely right that we haven't been equipped to do that in the past. But for me, the great excitement, and it's one I've been writing about since the 90s, is that we might be able now to crack the problem of legal risk management, of moving from reactive legal service to proactive legal service.
Richard, I'd love to hear your view about the state of affairs for our regulators and how they can govern what we're currently facing. Do you think they're fit for purpose?
One of the points I make in the book is that we should expect, as we move from a print-based industrial society to an AI-based digital society, that many of our institutions will need to change to accommodate the very different world in which we're inhabiting. And I think this is especially true in the legal world. If you look at the way we legislate, if we look at the way we create regulation, people in your community, tech lawyers, have been saying literally for 50 years that the law lags 5 to 10 years behind technological advance.
At least.
At least. We can't be having this in the AI-based world. Systems that we cannot yet conceive of profound global and local impact may pop up, and we need to be sufficiently agile to be able to regulate or to be able to think through policy and regulate and legislate in very quick time. And so I would challenge the extent to which our legislative processes and our regulation generation processes are indeed fit for purpose. I don't think this is trivial. I think it's true also, incidentally, of our court system. I've heard many senior judges saying one of the great things about the English system is that as these new challenges emerge, in the manner of the common law of the past, we can adapt our law sufficiently flexible in a common law system to accommodate new combinations of events. But as you know better than I do, if you have a dispute of a substantial nature, it will take many years to resolve. And interestingly also, whether or not an important new point of AI law goes through the court system is often rather arbitrary or a matter of luck or not luck. And so another challenge for us is to take a step back and ask what lawmaking should look like in a rapidly advancing AI-based society.
I agree entirely. I actually remember listening to you speak with Lord Briggs at an SCL event. It may have been almost 10 years ago, where you made the same point, and you were having
I only make 2 or 3 points.
Well, he was disagreeing with one of them, which I think was that actually the reflective process, particularly in lawmaking and in the way that judges do what they do, was in itself of intrinsic value and therefore irreplaceable by machines. And you were saying, well, actually, I challenged the presumption there, but also I would say that process is denying access to justice to the millions who are waiting behind.
This is our problem, that one can deeply appreciate and indeed even, again, romanticize our judicial process. And we have fantastic judges who are demonstrably independent and very clever. But it really is a Rolls-Royce service available to a very few, and everyone else is walking at best. And so we have to find ways, if we're committed to access to justice, cheaper and cheerful, but nonetheless reliable and, I think, proportionate. We have to find ways of resolving disputes differently. And since that conversation I had with now Lord Briggs, the technology's moved on so quickly that we can now imagine what AI-based dispute resolution might look like.
Let's move on to our last topic, and I'm really keen to discuss this with you. In your book, you talk a little bit about AI across the course of the next 5 years. And at the end, in particular, the chapter, The Great Schism, which I think is brilliant, I have to say. I enjoyed it.
Got that far.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. Absolutely loved it.
People comment on the book online without necessarily finishing. So delighted you made it to the end.
I thought it wouldn't be cricket to turn up and at least not have finished.
It wouldn't be unprecedented either, but
I mean, in that chapter, you go far, far into the future, way beyond the next 5 years, the next 50 years, the next 100 years, essentially, to think about what the future of humanity looks like in the context of AI, and if indeed there is a future for humanity in the context of AI. So I'd love to unpack that a bit, but I also want to reflect on something you say right at the start. You say that your own view has changed. And you talk about how AI is this double-edged sword, a really nice and neat idea of I suppose, capturing that there are both many blessings and many detriments that come with this advancement. Let's unpack that a bit.
So the question, the Great Schism, the background here is, I say, imagine, therefore, that our systems are unfathomably capable. Imagine we have not just AGI, artificial general intelligence, but superintelligence. And these systems are phenomenally more capable than us. What does that mean for the future of humanity? And I'm afraid I even go further and say, what does it mean for the future of the cosmos? And what I identify is essentially two different views. There is a view among some cosmologists and physicists which runs something like this. They say the universe has been around, the universe as we know it has been around for 13.8 billion years. Humans have been around a few 100,000 years. In the cosmic scheme of things, humans are simply a blink in the eye. And it may well turn out, the point is, that the only contribution that humanity makes to the cosmos is to develop these unfathomably more capable systems that in due course will do two things. They will propagate across the universe, bringing intelligent life of a sort across the universe, and will in due course replace us. That's not such a cheery view, but it's the view that many physicists take, that this is the next stage in evolution. There's all sorts of challenges and issues to discuss there, and we don't have time today, but I just want to give you the framework of the discussion. So the question you can ask is, well, what obligation do we owe, and to whom, if we have these systems? Because there's another school of thought that says, well, hang on a second, these systems are just lumps of kit. They're ones and zeros. They don't have consciences, although, as you know, I discussed that at length. They don't have any sense of morality. They aren't, as it were, sentient beings that can enjoy happiness or enjoy love. Surely the only such entities we know in the universe are humans, with our spirits, our souls, the ghost in the machine, whatever one might want to call it, but our distinctive humanity. And those people are, I suppose, arguing in a specific way for the sanctity of human life. And what they would say is our duty to the future is to preserve this marvelous gift we have of humanity, and this marvelous gift of human happiness and pleasure and love, although there's much else wrong with the world. And the great schism is between those who believe that our cosmic obligation is to spread some kind of intelligence around the world, and those who say, no, the obligation is to future humans to use the technology to promote our happiness and our health and our well-being. And that is a debate that is theological, it's philosophical, as well as technological. And the way I frame it is we have four options, and I draw from corporate law in this context. I say we might want to have a takeover where we say, let's hand the keys of the kingdom over to these much more intelligent or capable systems. We might have a merger, which some people call transhumanism, where biological organic humans merge with digital machines to create some new kind of entity. We might want to have a joint venture, but we keep it arm's length, so we're not entirely linked to one another. And we might want to some termination where we want to say, let's just stop this now. The whole thing is looking far too scary.
I remember seeing you explain that for the first time certainly the first time that I heard it, which was the event that you did with Jamie and Daniel in London with the interviewer from the BBC, whose name escapes me now, Emily
Maitless.
And the entire room essentially went, and her face was quite the picture as well. The thought of transhumanism, the thought of the takeover, all of these ideas that you've obviously been percolating on for a long time, suddenly washing across this audience.
Yeah, in 2 minutes. Anyway, so that's the part that look, we're not going to answer today, but I just want to say that's the issue. And what's very interesting for some people is glaringly obvious. It's like, of course, this must be about keeping control of these systems and promoting humanity. But there is another view that this may be our grand contribution. This may be why, if one has a kind of purposive view of the universe, this may be why humanity exists.
You say in The Great Schism that your view is that you're not interested in going further than a joint venture.
That's right.
Why is that?
In the end, and you'll notice I end the book quite quickly on that note, and I do this intentionally because it's in a way it's just a personal observation. It seemed to me it's an absurd cosmic gamble, and it's a great arrogance to think that we have some kind of cosmic duty. The arrogance is to imagine there are no other intelligent lives out there. The duty is to think that this is the way we can contribute like no other entities out there. It seems to me to gamble humanity on what is quite speculative would be a rather large gamble. But the philosophical argument, it's quite a difficult argument. The philosophical argument is that although we're creating these amazingly capable machines, if they are in the end what David Chalmers calls zombies, that's to say there is no conscience or consciousness, there is no internal perspective, there is no subjectivity, there's no cognitive events, they're not thinking. Do we really think the end game is to fill the universe up with these lumps of metal that are beeping and flashing with no one there actually to perceive them? That seems to be a rather strange outcome. And the problem of other minds, as we call it, we cannot ever know whether or not these systems actually are enjoying consciousness in the same way as we are. And again, I say in any event, if consciousness does arise in very complex systems, whether or not that consciousness will be anything like our consciousness is another question. So these are deep, difficult scientific and philosophical issues, which I try to unpack in a rather homely way. And in the end, I say the gamble with humanity would be intolerable. But that then does lead to some interesting questions about what we should do now, because certainly Silicon Valley is moving towards the development of these massively more capable systems. But if we do not have in mind these systems enjoying some kind of autonomy, why is it we will be doing this? Or should we not be discussing the limits we'd like to impose on these systems? And is that a realistic notion at all, given there's so many different countries with different aspirations for AI involved? So I say the genie is half out the bottle. I think we've got about 10 years to think through what we want to do with AI. Can I answer your other question?
Please.
It's a rather crucial one. And my short story in this is that over the last 44 years, I've been very optimistic about AI. I've seen that as the technology's developed, many of our gravest social and common challenges across the world, our healthcare crisis, our access to justice crisis, our educational crisis, our climate crisis, in various ways, I'm entirely confident that future generations of AI will help us overcome these problems. And that is cause to rejoice. But as you'll also have read in the book, I identify a mountain range of risks as well that I hadn't sought to look too carefully at until the late 2022 period, when the systems made a huge leap forward. And when I look at the range of risks, whether they be the existential risks or the societal risks or the economic risks, or the risks of these systems simply giving rise to everyday loss or damage or injury, it does seem to me that the challenge for our era is to balance the benefits and threats of AI. And that's why I say that saving humanity with and from AI is the defining challenge of our age.
Is the cause of your reflection partly because you've seen this technology, as you say, or is it also partly your own increase of wisdom as you've progressed on this journey? What's the cause?
I'm not sure I'm getting any wiser, but I am seeing systems that are undertaking tasks and that have the potential, in my view, to be the cause of great harm. I am seeing systems that make humanity vulnerable. And it wasn't really until 2022, and we all said this, that the AI was anything rather than quite narrow. We were seeing quite high-performing systems in very thin areas of life. It might be game playing, it might be medical diagnostics, it might be legal drafting, but that wasn't looking bluntly like an existential threat. As these systems become essentially general purpose, I think we have to be alive, for example, to their weaponization. We have to be alive to the idea that there could be a great disparity between rich and poor, because only a very few people, it looks at this stage, will actually own all the data and the processing and the models that will underpin this technology.
Richard, thank you very much for joining me on the AI and Data Show.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.